Stephen Krakauer joins us in a moment to talk about the finger-snapping madness at the New York Times. But speaking of madness, this footage has just come in of MSNBC's Rachel Maddow having a full-on meltdown. Why? Because she thinks that if Donald Trump wins the presidency in November, but loses his immunity case in the Supreme Court, he is going to stay in office past 2028 and declare himself president for life. Yeah, right? See if you can follow along with this bonkers logic. Have a look.
The conclusion that we can arrive at now, based on what they have done without having to wait for the ruling, is that they are ensuring that Trump will not face trial. And when they inevitably rule that presidents aren't immune from prosecution after they leave office, what that will tell Donald Trump, if by then he is president, is that he can never leave the office of the presidency.
Right.
And if he is voted out in 2028, he cannot leave office, and he is willing to he is welcome to commit any crimes he wants to, as long as he is still president, in order to ignore the result of that election and stay in power for life, because otherwise he's going to go to prison when he gets out.
What can you say to that? I mean, what an absolutely unbelievable grift this has become for the snake oil selling traveling preachers of the left. And they've got only one act left, which is to terrify people about Trump. If you listen to Maddow and the MSNBC people, everything's a disaster. If Trump wins his immunity case, it's the end of the world. He loses the case, it's just as bad. There's no other word for it. These people are charlatans. Now, I'm pleased to welcome back one of my all-time favorite guests on the U.S. Report. He's one of the smartest observers of the problems in the U.S. media, its biases and groupthink, and he recently wrote a great book I've talked about here before that's just been re-released called Uncovered: How the Media Got Cozy with Power, Abandoned Its Principles, and Lost the People. Steve Krakauer joins me now. Steve, welcome to the program. I want to open things up with this incredible story from The Atlantic magazine by Adam Rubenstein. He was an ex-opinion editor at the New York Times, and he talked about his experience at the paper. If you wrote this in a comedy skit, your bosses would tell you to wind it back. And I want to read you this little bit here because it's amazing. He writes that on one of my first days at the New York Times, I went to an orientation with more than a dozen other new hires. We had to do an icebreaker, pick a starburst out of a jar, and then answer a question. My starburst was pink, I believe, and so I had to answer the pink prompt, which had me respond with my favorite sandwich. I blurted out, "The spicy chicken sandwich from Chick-fil-A," and considered the ice broken. But then the HR representative leading the orientation chided me. "We don't do that here. They hate gay people." People started snapping their fingers in acclamation. I hadn't been thinking about the fact that Chick-fil-A was transgressive in liberal circles. I said, "Not the politics, the chicken." But it was too late. I sat down, ashamed. Stephen Krakauer, as an illustration of the bubble that the American left-wing corporate media have become, well, I mean, it's hard to find a better example of that, is it?
Oh, it's perfect. It's just a perfect encapsulation of the craziness of American newsrooms these days. I know Adam a little bit. I also actually write about one of the incidents that Adam, writes about in that piece, which is when he got pushed out of the New York Times over the Tom Cotton op-ed. I spend a lot of time in my book Uncovered on this because I think it was a hugely consequential moment. This is when, and I tell stories in there, people are on the record, former New York Times employees, that there were employees at the New York Times who were crying on Zoom meetings because their friends were mad at them because they worked for the New York Times, this horrible paper that dared to publish a column by a United States Senator, Tom Cotton. I mean, it's completely insane, but this is what we were dealing with then, and I think, unfortunately, to a degree now. And I think there's another element to this, because it's not just that piece, which is just perfect, but also the reaction to it. The amount of journalists, including journalists like Nicole Hannah-Jones, who's won lots of awards, who works at the New York Times, in theory, although she never really writes for them anymore, saying that this is false. This didn't happen, she said. And then The Atlantic says, oh no, everything was fact-checked, including this anecdote. And they still say, she demands to see the fact-check document. I mean, there's Chick-fil-A truthers is what the people are talking about. An absolute insane scenario. And it just gives you an idea. This happened in 2019. In 2020 was the Tom Cotton op-ed. We're in 2024. Nothing has changed. It's only gotten worse.
Well, I mean, the New York Times sets so much of the agenda for the rest of the U.S. media, but this is a real problem because, you know, you talk in your book about how the kids have basically taken over in these newsrooms. The adults feel like they're kind of not in charge anymore. But there's a moment where you talk about how objective facts among these journalists are now considered markers of white privilege. Where does all of this come from, and how difficult is it going to make actually getting real news about the 2024 campaign from the American press?
It's going to make it very difficult. Yeah, you touch on one of the quotes that actually is a former New York Times journalist, Amy Chozick, who went on the record with me in the book. Everyone who's in the book is on the record, and I appreciate them putting their name to it because it takes some courage to do that. But she said there's a generation of young journalists who believe that objectivity is akin to white supremacy, which is an insane thing to think. But I think she's absolutely right. And this goes to the problem, because it's not just enough that there are journalists out there, and certainly people on the left, who believe that there are bad opinions on the right or even stupid opinions. No, these are dangerous opinions. And when you start putting that out there, that certain points of view are not just bad, but dangerous, that they need to be suppressed, that there's this anti-speech activism in the media, you are going to get a reduction in the amount of facts that are being put out there. That's just inevitable. And so that's really where we're at right now. It's a huge, huge problem. And I frankly think there are people out there, including in the corporate media who I talk to, that believe that there is a problem. But this is not getting fixed until Donald Trump is off the main stage. So it's not getting fixed until 2025 at the earliest, and certainly potentially until 2029.
Well, and you talk about dangerous facts and bad facts and things that shouldn't be talked about. MSNBC analyst Claire McCaskill has said that the media should stop fact-checking Joe Biden. Have a look at this.
I move that every newspaper in America quits doing any fact checks on Joe Biden.
She's not some fresh-faced kid just out of Columbia J School. She's been around for a while, and this is now the attitude even with some senior journalists.
Absolutely. And look, Claire McCaskill, former United States Senator, partisans in this country on the left and frankly on the right, I get that they don't understand the way journalism is supposed to work, that there's a freedom of speech, that we want more voices, not less out there, that we want a free flow exchange of ideas. The more information, the better. But let me tell you something. A lot of people who are journalists these days agree with Claire McCaskill, and you're right. It's not just the young kids, although the young kids have more power than young kids in journalism ever had before in today's social media era. No, there are a lot of people in those newsrooms, including people who she was talking to on that Morning Joe program when she said this, who completely agree with her, that we need to stop telling the truth about Joe Biden. Or, you know, we saw this with the Herb report, the HUR report here with the special counsel. How dare he say the truth about what Joe Biden said in those private sessions when he couldn't remember the year that his son died? How dare they say that? Because what if that influences the way people think about it? I mean, this is the level we're at right now. And it's not just coming from partisans like Claire McCaskill. It's coming from the media themselves. And that's a huge, huge problem.
And Stephen, before I let you go, there was an amazing thing happened the other day. SNL, Saturday Night Live, made fun of Trump, but that's not the news because they do that all the time. But they actually did it in a funny way. Let's have a little look at this clip from their upcoming hit film, White Men Can't Trump.
But that's all about to change.
Gordon, thought you could use these. Donald J. Trump? Whoa, Trump never surrender sneakers? Awesome. I'm open.
And Gordon Dwyer's about to find out that winning
Come on, man, how did you miss that?
is a state of mind.
I didn't miss. It went in.
So you're saying these Trump shoes made you good at basketball?
No, they gave me the power to say I'm good at basketball and then double down on that until people actually start to believe it.
Now he gets whatever he wants.
Mr. Mitchell, everybody's saying I should have your office because my cubicle is a disaster right now.
Well, can I have a minute to gather my things?
Bye-bye.
White men can Trump.
Oh, you got new shoes too?
Yeah, Air Biden's. Now pass me the rock. Here we go. Uh-oh.
Now, very quickly, we don't have a lot of time, but you said that this is significant because it signals that they're changing tone, and the fact that they brought Shane Gillis back to do this is important. Very quickly, Stephen Krakauer, just tell us about that.
Yeah, Shane Gillis, who got fired for some offensive comments he made years ago, he brought him back as host. And you're right, yeah, this is a funny sketch. It's not a pro-Trump sketch, but it's funny. And you compare it to the way the show started, but really you could look at any time. There's so lack of nuance and so lack of comedy, frankly, because they're so partisan. Shane Gillis jumps in there and is actually funny. It's a welcome change. I don't think we're going to see it forever, though.
Well, that's all right. Anyway, thank you so much, Stephen Krakauer, for your time, author of Uncovered. Really appreciate it. Now, before we go, in a moment, John Fund is going to bring us the latest on the mysterious state of Joe Biden's health. And is the president really taking a cognitive test every day? But first, check out this little bit of news Kamala Harris just dropped. It looks like the Democrats are going to be sneakily activating. And don't you love words like that? Young people to register other people to vote. In a totally nonpartisan fashion, I'm sure.
Under the Federal Work Study program, now allows students to get paid through Federal Work Study to register people and to be nonpartisan poll workers. As we know, this is important for a number of reasons. One, to engage our young leaders in this process and activate them in terms of their ability to strengthen our community.
Sorry, but this is an absolute scam. This is the same old community organizing business that was run by Barack Obama and which got America into the partisan divided mess it is in now. Do not believe a word you hear when they say that this is nonpartisan, because when they use phrases like activate and our communities, that is Democrat speak for making sure the fix is in.